This Ram 2500 HD four-wheel drive has a growling noise coming out of it. And I'm pretty sure it's not my stomach, but it always pays to play it safe. So this pickup truck has a rotating, growling, howling, low-flying airplane noise. You might be able to hear it right there. And my initial response is to buy a nice set of rims and tires because the donuts that are installed on these from the factory are hideous. But these tires are in very good shape. They are not worn uneven. The shoulders are not choppy. And when you run your hand on the tire, like this, it does not have the washboard effect that would cause a road noise or a howl. Since the growling is coming from the front end, but it is not the tires, that leaves us with the wheel bearing hub assembly. You want to get yourself out on a nice, smooth country road, so you won't be able to perform this test in Michigan. Make sure the road conditions are safe for this, and then as you're driving, making it howl as loud as possible, you're going to slightly swerve back and forth. I hope you could hear that. The growling noise got quieter as I turned right and got louder as I turned left. Pretty much yada yada yada, it's a front wheel bearing. Now, because I'm a peasant, we have to use the poor man's car lift. What you also should do when you're checking for looseness or chuck is give it a spin and listen. Okay, that one's pretty quiet. If one of your wheel bearings is loose, then it's probably not the one growling. Don't ask me why, that's just the way it is. But the loose wheel bearing needs to be replaced first, and you just kind of hope that that was the one making the noise. The reason the loose wheel bearing gets replaced first is because a growling wheel bearing is going out. A wheel bearing with a lot of chuck in it has gone out, like me, with your mom. Okay, that one sounds a little more growly, but I want to show you how to diagnose a wheel bearing that you can't tell just by spinning it. To diagnose the growling noise, you can either use a pry bar, or if you have like $4, you can get yourself a mechanic's stethoscope. And then put like $8 worth of black tape on it because you broke it, but whatever. With all four corners safely up on Harbor Freight jack stands, have your helper turn off the traction control or pull an ABS fuse, put it in 4 high, and then maintain an even cruising speed of, let's say, 40 or 50 miles an hour. Then, carefully put your stethoscope on the head of one of the wheel bearing bolts and then compare the noise level to the other side. Obviously, whichever wheel bearing growls at you the loudest needs to be replaced. Now with this clip right here, I hope you can kind of see it right there. These have a safety clip. It's a pain in the butt. Oh. Sometimes you can just bypass the safety clip by sticking a screwdriver in there. Throw that over the front. Alright, I'm going to be taking off the caliper bracket bolts instead of the caliper bolts. You can do it either way, that's up to you. Caliper bracket bolts are, if you're a communist, 24 millimeter, or if you like freedom units, that's 15/16. I like to pry it back just a little bit to release the brakes. That way when you pry it off there, you're not being so hard on the pistons. When it comes right off. Set her in there. Give yourself a tarp strap and somehow fasten it on there so the thing doesn't fall out. Last thing you want to do is let this thing drop and pull on this brake hose, potentially break it down or hurt it. That's going to come off hard. All right, this rotor's somewhat stuck, and the best place to hit it is right here between the studs. But this is not the bathroom, so we need to have some pretty good aim. We don't want to ruin the studs by hitting them, so you want to be real careful. I just remembered we're replacing the wheel bearing, which comes with new studs, so I guess it really didn't matter if you ruined them or not. But since we have several of these trucks, I'm going to knock out the studs that I didn't accidentally hit and keep them for future if I do ruin a stud on another truck, because these are kind of expensive. Time to take the axle nut loose, give her just a little bit of squirt there with some penetrating oil, and then 1 5/16" socket. I like to make sure the axle shaft is free, so I give her a little tap right on the end. This one, the threads, you know, it's tapered right at the end here. The threads don't come out to the end, so I don't have to put the nut back on if I'm just giving her a little bit of a tap. We're trying to be careful of not ruining the threads, is what I'm saying. Yeah, that one's real free, so we're good there. I like to lubricate the hub assembly bolts, wheel bearing bolts, whatever you want to call them. And then, because these are almost always too tight for the impact, get a ratchet in there, get them knocked loose. Wasn't even that tight. Grab yourself an impact and only turn these bolts out maybe where they're flush there, maybe 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch. With the method we're going to use to remove it, I want to leave the bolts in. So right there where that one's flush. There is a tool that's called, I don't know what it's called. We always call it a wheel bearing popping tool. Basically what it is, it's a piece of shaft stock slightly longer than this with an 18mm hex cut out of the end so you can set it on your wheel bearing bolts. I forgot to bring the one from work, but you can purchase them on the internet machine for like 40 bucks from a bunch of different sites. In a pinch, you can grab yourself a socket and an extension, preferably an extension that has shoulders here, or else you'll end up just shoving it together. That is, you know, get it your setup where it's the right length. But then you're going to want to grab yourself a 1/2 inch bolt, stubby bolt, and drop it in your extension. So that way you're spreading the load out all the way around instead of coming against the knuckle or the axle actually like this and ruining your extension. This method works best if you have a lovely assistant who can understand basic hand signals. But if you're a jerk and have no friends, you can do this by yourself if you're careful. Place the extension or your popping tool on the bolt and then turn until the popping tool is squarely against this part of the axle right here, and then that wedges. You either have your helper or yourself start the truck and turn the steering wheel in the direction to put pressure on the bolt and pop one side. You just work your way back and forth, go gentle. And I cannot stress this enough, don't be stupid, don't get rammy, because you can ruin steering parts and a lot of other things by being rammy. So you just want to take it gently and work it back and forth. Awesome. You just kind of take a chisel back here, pop it. This one came out pretty easy because it's a newer style truck. Some of the old trucks that the internet likes to call second gens, I've had where they're just growing in there so bad, they're fighting the whole way. Get off of there. Now would be an excellent time to have already checked your ball joints and your wheel joints before you even started this project, so you could have the parts if you needed those too. You're going to want to get yourself a wire brush on a die grinder or something like that. You do not want to use a sanding wheel because you don't want to take any material away. But you want to get in here, clean the rust out. That way it all slides back together. You don't want to have to draw it in. I like to take anti-seize and coat the inside of the knuckle where the wheel bearing slides in so that rust does not build up and put pressure on the wheel bearing. I also coat the splines of the front axle shaft so that it doesn't seize in there for future repairs. Now we got those snugged up, we're going to come back and retorque them because you do lose a lot of torque going through an extension and a swivel. But before I turn the wheel, I want to go ahead and give this one a little few ugga-duggas. Since we're reusing this one and we did have a little trouble getting it off, we're going to clean up the pilot right here on the inside, and then we're going to also clean up the mating face of the back side of the rotor here so that there's nothing in between. And we're also going to make sure that this part right here is clean and no flaky rust comes off, because when you go to slide it on there, if any flaky rust falls off and gets in between, it'll cause a shake. Since the rotors have a tendency to corrode or rust fast to the wheel bearing, we're again painting the pilot on the wheel bearing with anti-seize so it doesn't corrode or rust fast again. Now, I want to make sure that's good and clean. Got that on there. Now that we have the rotor on, grab yourself a bigger nut, put it over there as a spacer. Throw this nut on backwards. And the rotor stays in place while you throw the caliper and stuff on. Now you want to, while you have this apart, make sure that your slides here and here are free. And if they're not, you want to disassemble it, lubricate them, make sure everything's working good. Put that on there, and before you even put the bolts in, make sure that this brake hose right here doesn't have a loop in it. I'm sure there's a proper torque spec for this, but I find that about maybe 14 or 15 ugga-duggas. Perfect. All right. This goes through here. Make sure you put all of the points where this went through one of these hangers back, because the last thing you want to do is have this cord rub or catch on something and tear, and then you probably have to get a new wheel bearing if you can't purchase the wheel speed sensor by itself, which you probably can't. I guess they send new clippies, so I can just get rid of them. Now, before you get too carried away, since this is an electrical plug, it is always a good idea to give just a little bit of dielectric grease on it. That way, if the seal leaks a little bit, it doesn't corrode. If you haven't figured out, we live in the Rust Belt, where they spray basically toxic waste on the road, and it eats everything, rusts everything. And also, a little bit of dielectric grease helps lubricate the gasket on the plug, and it clips together a lot easier. Make sure you can hear the click. And then pull back, that way you know you're engaged all the way. Right there. Goodzo. Because I've had to torch too many lug nuts off and replace too many studs and nuts, either take a couple drops of oil, put it inside the nut, or you can use anti-seize. I actually prefer oil on the lug nuts over anti-seize, but this is what I have handy and it upsets people, so I like that too. Boy, with that wheel bearing noise missing, you can really hear all the other rattles and clanks that this truck makes. Oh well. I would like to thank you for watching. And I apologize for being a little long-winded in this video, but I've seen a lot of dumb things and I've had to fix most of them. We'll catch you in the next video.